Hey guys, tonight we're going to slip sideways into history. Not backwards exactly, but into that misty shimmer of possibility where one choice rewrites an empire. Picture Alexandria in its twilight glow. The marble is warm underfoot. The air smells faintly of lotus and ambition. And a queen one you definitely know is about to decide whether to die with drama or pivot with flair. Because in this version, Cleopatra doesn't take the asp. No snaky dramatics. Instead, she actually listens, when Octavian, the very man besieging her city, offers her something unthinkable. Not chains, not exile, but a throne, a crown, a hand in marriage, in the full, awkward, Roman political speech sort of way. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, drop your location and what time you're tuning in. Are you in Singapore? Saskatchewan, Staten Island? I love seeing how far these sleepy little stories travel. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge barefoot through the pillared halls of the palace, heavy drapes fluttering like sighs. Alexandria, though cracking under Roman siege, still glitters with all the arrogance of a city that believes it should survive. And in this timeline, it does. Because Cleopatra, master of languages, seduction, and sharp political calculus, chooses diplomacy over despair. Octavian lean. Serious. A bit too fond of cold wine and colder tactics, knows that if he lets Cleopatra die, he gets a legend. But if he marries her, he gets Egypt. Permanently. With flair. He gets legitimacy, godhood, and access to eyeliner technology Rome hasn't even dreamed of. So the offer comes at twilight, over rose-scented water and the distant clang of swordplay. Cleopatra studies him like he's a scroll. She's deciding whether to annotate or burn. Historians still argue whether her decision was strategic or desperate. But what matters is she says yes. Not the kind of yes you'd scream in a rom-com. More the kind of yes you murmur while already planning which Roman senator to blackmail first. The news travels faster than honey at a feast. Rome reels. Some cheer exotic queens are in this season. Others rage Egyptians don't even have proper citizenship codes. But Octavian returns not with a corpse, but with a queen. And not just any queen. This is Cleopatra, who allegedly invented her own perfume blend, convinced two of the most powerful men in Rome to risk it all, and once entered a diplomatic meeting rolled up in a carpet. A woman who, in the face of defeat, chose to marry her way to immortality. The wedding is chaos. Held in a barely restored temple to Isis, it's officiated by a confused priest who keeps mixing Latin with Coptic. Cleopatra wears indigo and gold, her crown shaped like a lotus that whispers rumors of divine right. Octavian tries to smile, but mostly looks like a man who's agreed to something far beyond his pay grade. There's wine. There's scandal. There's a moment where the high priest accidentally calls Octavian Mark Antony, and a dagger drops from somewhere, clattering ominously. The crocodile in ceremonial garb bites someone, but the vows are spoken. The empire is wed, and suddenly, everything changes. The Mediterranean still churns with war and debt. Rome still mutters in dark corners. But a new order has begun. Cleopatra is no longer the doomed lover in a tragedy. She's empress, with eyeliner sharp enough to redraw borders. The palace buzzes. Musicians switch to minor chords. Poets start rewriting epics that haven't even happened yet. And you, somewhere in the marble-tiled shadows, realize you've just witnessed the death of one world and the extravagant, perfumed birth of another. You sleep that night to the sound of singing boats in the harbor, and wake to a world where Egypt and Rome no longer glare across the sea but dance, cheek pressed to cheek, each pretending they're leading. And just like that, history slides on a new track, still gilded, still bloody, but now at least for a while drenched in rose oil and possibility. You rise early the next morning, the kind of morning that smells like olive oil, salt air, and consequence. Alexandria is buzzing with a kind of stunned silence, as if the city itself is still processing the idea that its queen is now Rome's empress, not a prisoner, not a memory, but something larger. Outside the palace, workers scramble to repaint official frescoes. One features Octavian offering a laurel to Cleopatra, while Cupid photobombs with a scroll that reads, "Treaty." Another shows Mark Antony being politely faded out, like a chalk drawing in the rain. Inside, the vibe is weirder. Cleopatra has not changed. She still glides barefoot, her gold-threaded robe whispering secrets with each step. But now there are Roman advisors in every corner, like curious but disapproving houseplants. They don't understand Egyptian protocols. They definitely don't understand the daily lotus blessings, and they are very worried about the cats. Octavian, meanwhile, sits stiffly in a breakfast chamber shaped like a sun disk, eating figs and trying not to look overwhelmed. He married an empire, and now the empire is redecorating his entire personality. Historians still argue whether this version of Octavian becomes softer, wiser, or simply more paranoid, but you can tell he's trying. He compliments the way incense is wafted in zigzags. He allows himself to be robed in saffron and indigo, although the golden sandals give him blisters. He even agrees to meet with Cleopatra's astrologers, though he secretly asks a Roman augur to double-check their math. And then there's the politics. The Roman Senate is not thrilled. Word reaches them via peacock courier. Okay, not literally, but the Egyptian messenger does arrive on a chariot pulled by white ibises, which does not help. Senators grumble. Cicero's ghost groans audibly somewhere. This is not what they meant by stabilizing the Republic. So, of course, they try to annul the marriage. They draft legislation filled with words like sacrilege and dynastic overreach. One senator even claims Octavian has been bewitched by coal. But the people are loving it. Alexandrian fashion trends sweep Rome. Clay pots labeled Cleopatra's glow serum sell out. Bread vendors start naming their loaves Cleo crusts. A musical satire called Octavia opens in the Forum and is promptly shut down after 3 performances. One small fire, and a very offended ostrich. Meanwhile, Cleopatra does what Cleopatra does best, governs with silk and steel. She retools Roman bureaucracy with Egyptian flair. Taxes, now paid partially in perfumes. Legal disputes, decided by a council of scholars who quote poetry before sentencing. The Navy repainted in peacock tones, because intimidation works better when the sails match the vibe. You stroll the palace halls one afternoon and overhear her dictating a policy letter. It starts with, "To the noble people of Carthage, may your olives grow fat and your husbands clever," and ends with instructions for a bathhouse renovation and a gentle threat disguised as a compliment. It's impressive. And Octavian he adapts. At first, he tries to remain the serious one, the practical Roman, the guy who keeps everyone grounded. But then, Cleopatra throws a state dinner where the dessert is a jewel-encrusted pudding shaped like the known world. And Octavian actually laughs for the first time in weeks. And that's when the myth of their union starts to solidify. Not a merger of convenience, not a scandal, but a legend. Rome and Egypt together. Civilization's power couple. People start telling stories. That Octavian once tried to out-debate a sphinx. That Cleopatra secretly choreographs all imperial processions. That their bedroom ceiling is painted with a map of the stars. And that sometimes, at night, you can hear them arguing softly in Latin and Coptic over the best place to conquer next. One fringe historian swears the two even invented a board game called Domina et Princeps, where the goal is to seduce senators while building aqueducts. No copies survive, possibly because it was banned for causing uprisings in Gaul. You pause at the edge of the gardens, where acacia trees rustle like applause, and a pair of royal crocodiles lounge in sunlit pools. Octavian passes by, trailing scrolls, muttering something about military annexation with grace. Behind him, Cleopatra breezes through, already wearing her diplomacy smile. And you know whatever else happens, the world will never be the same. Because this is no longer a tale of conquest. It's a story of collaboration. A strange, glittery, possibly doomed experiment in power sharing and palm trees. And it's only just begun. You find yourself watching the palace transform not just in decoration, but in function. Rome, for all its discipline and empire-building muscle, never quite figured out how to throw a good festival without a few riots. Egypt, under Cleopatra, practically schedules joy. And now that Octavian has joined the party, whether willingly or dragged by his ceremonial sandals, the empire is learning to exhale. The new imperial court is equal parts marble gravitas and palm frond whimsy. Senators visiting from Rome arrive expecting austere silence, and instead find harpists in every corner and a court jester dressed as a falcon. One even mistakes a sacred ibis for a buffet item and causes a minor diplomatic incident that results in 2 weeks of mandatory bird-themed sensitivity training. Cleopatra, though, is in her element. Every day begins with a scented council session where decisions are made over lotus tea and served with fruit carved into miniature pyramids. Cleopatra reads tax reports with the same intensity most people reserve for horoscopes. She has charts. She has backup scrolls. She has a secretary who speaks 3 languages and can do calligraphy while walking backwards. Octavian tries to keep pace, but he's more of a let's build another aqueduct kind of guy. Cleopatra, meanwhile, wants to redesign the empire's entire aesthetic. Historians still argue whether her real aim was political unity or just a deeper shade of lapis lazuli for the naval uniforms. The two of them clash, often hilariously. You once witness an argument where Octavian insists that Roman standards require straight marble columns, and Cleopatra counters by commissioning an artist to carve spiral ones shaped like papyrus reeds. She wins. The columns become trendsetters. Rome begins importing papyrus just to keep up. And then there's the matter of where to govern from. Rome, naturally, assumes Octavian will drag his new empress back to the Tiber and resume politics as usual. Cleopatra, however, has no intention of leaving Alexandria's scented breezes and silk-curtained chambers for a city that still uses lead pipes and throws vegetables at its actors. Compromise arrives in the form of a new capital, Neo-Roma, built halfway between Rome and Alexandria. This experimental city is constructed in record time using Roman engineering and Egyptian design. Streets laid out like constellations, fountains shaped like Nile gods, a Senate chamber that smells faintly of cinnamon and fear. They plant olive trees and date palms side by side and declare it a symbol of harmonious bureaucracy. You take a stroll through Neo-Roma one morning, past scribes arguing over scroll placement and vendors selling bread shaped like famous philosophers. The people seem oddly content. They're confused. Yes, but also deeply entertained. After all, their taxes now fund mosaic murals of Cleopatra taming a lion beside a rather stiff-looking Octavian in a toga. And oh, the propaganda. Coins are minted with both their faces, hers winking slightly, his trying not to look like he's blinking. Plays are commissioned. One particularly popular comedy features Cleopatra disguising herself as a Roman tax inspector and accidentally seducing a senator. Octavian pretends to be offended, but secretly funds the sequel. Even the Roman legions are affected. They grumble at first, too many peacock feathers. Why are the helmets scented? But when Cleopatra sends each regiment personalized armor charms, inscribed with protective hieroglyphs, morale mysteriously spikes. And with morale comes conquest. Together, they expand the empire not through sheer force, but through charm, marriage alliances, and a surprisingly effective exchange program involving exotic fruits. Gaul falls not to legions, but to quince preserves and interpretive dance. One fringe scholar claims Cleopatra once won over a rebellious kingdom by teaching its king to contour his nose. No one can confirm this, but several busts unearthed in the region show surprisingly sharp nasal shading. You return to the palace one evening to find Cleopatra drafting another treaty, her voice calm but steely. Octavian listens, then jokes about adding a clause to include mandatory poetry nights. They laugh. The torchlight flickers across golden ceilings. A scribe sneezes and drops a scroll. History continues stranger, softer, and somehow still unstoppable. You wonder how long can this last, because empires built on harmony are rare. Most are forged in fire and held by fear. But this one, it's being held together by ambition, eyeliner, and the stubborn belief that a shared dream is stronger than a shared bloodline. And for now, that's enough. You wake to the sound of flutes, not the alarming kind. No sirens, no battle horns, just a soft, whimsical melody drifting in from the eastern colonnade, where someone is probably rehearsing for yet another sunrise ritual involving honey, incense, and a dove named Philomena. Neroma is thriving, the city, once a slightly absurd experiment, now hums with an improbable dignity. Merchants in indigo robes haggle over papyrus scrolls and olive oil. The Senate Annex is crowded daily with debates that somehow end in applause. The tax collectors have started wearing matching sandals, and a street poet named Lucilla has been declared the unofficial empress of satire after rhyming aqueduct with bad conduct. At the center of it all, of course, are Cleopatra and Octavian. But things are shifting at first. You notice it only in small ways. Cleopatra's morning meetings begin later. Octavian's public speeches grow a touch sharper, more Roman. He's spending more time with his old advisors, stern men in browns and grays, who look like they've never laughed in their lives and wouldn't recognize a metaphor if it bit their toga. The tension is palpable. One afternoon, Cleopatra introduces a new decree to commemorate the flooding of the Nile, a 3-day festival involving floating lanterns, underwater poetry readings, and mandatory floral wreaths for all horses. Octavian nods politely, but later holds a separate forum session where he tries to reduce it to a single afternoon with optional aquatic poetry. Historians still argue whether this marks the beginning of the fissure, small at first, like a crack in a mosaic. But spreading, it's not just cultural, it's logistical. Rome wants efficiency. Egypt wants grandeur. Octavian favors delegation. Cleopatra prefers surveillance via palace cats. each one trained to hiss at the word bribe. He wants roads. She wants garden paths with built-in fountains that sing lullabies. He wants census data. She wants dream interpretation charts cross-referenced with trade logs. You begin to see them less in public together. He attends a gladiator-themed symposium in Capri. She holds a perfume diplomacy summit in Cyprus. Gossip flows like watered wine. And yet, despite the rumors, they never fully break. Their connection, whatever strange, star-braided thing it is, endures. There's still laughter, still mutual respect. At one rare joint appearance, you see Cleopatra whisper something to Octavian mid-speech, and he nearly chokes on his ceremonial fig. Behind closed doors, though that's a different empire. You stumble upon a half-open door one night and hear voices. You want another census, she says. Voice sharp. I want clarity. He answers. We govern half the world. We need to know it. There is knowledge, she counters. And then there is understanding. One does not always lead to the other. Silence. Then laughter. Then a splash of wine. It's messy. It's beautiful. And you begin to realize the most surprising thing of all, Cleopatra might actually be winning. Not in battles, not in territory, but in tone. Roman cities are celebrating solstices. Legionaries are wearing eyeliner. There's a temple in Sicily now, dedicated to Fortuna Cleopatra, goddess of beauty and civic planning. Even Cicero's great-nephew is seen quoting Egyptian poetry before condemning it with great flourish. Rome is changing, and Rome does not like to change. There are mutterings back home. Secret meetings, Gubias. Quiet scrolls passed by wax seal. Some call for a divorce. Others suggest an accident. One faction even floats the idea of replacing Octavian with his nephew Agrippa, until Agrippa himself throws a lute at the suggestion and announces he's retiring to raise ducks. You wander the quieter districts of Neo-Roma and see the shift firsthand. Murals of the royal couple are increasingly weathered. Markets sell fewer Cleopatra charms. A theater troupe changes the ending of their play, giving Octavian the last word instead of her. But Cleopatra remains unbothered. She walks through the city like a queen whose crown is carved from time itself. She smiles at children, blesses shopkeepers, and casually drops imperial edicts with poetry scribbled in the margins. She still believes truly that a better world is possible. And perhaps that's why Octavian can't quite let go, because for all his spreadsheets and swords, he knows what she offers is rarer legacy shaped not by fear, but by feeling. You watch him stand at her side during a lunar eclipse ceremony. Expression unreadable. She places her hand over his, and for one soft moment, you believe they might yet hold the empire together. But shadows are creeping, and the stars above, once so aligned, are beginning to drift. The first real thunderclap comes not from a storm, but from a scroll. A courier arrives breathless at the marble steps of the palace, soaked not with rain, but panic. He delivers a sealed document, one of those tightly wound, wax-stamped missives that smells of ink, sweat, and bad decisions. Octavian reads it twice. Cleopatra, from across the chamber, does not need to ask. She already knows. It's about Rome, specifically about the Senate. They voted on something, a motion, a proposal wrapped in civility but sharpened with intent. In so many carefully worded phrases, they suggest that Octavian return alone to Rome, that Neo-Roma be disbanded as an unsustainable indulgence, that the empire needs a single center of power again, preferably one that doesn't involve incense, cats, and pyramid-shaped seating charts. Historians still argue whether this vote was a tactical power grab or the Senate's version of a passive-aggressive breakup letter. Either way, the message is clear. The old guard wants their boy back. Octavian spends days pacing the sunlit colonnades, torn between legacy and loyalty. Rome is his birthright. But Neo-Roma was theirs. You watch Cleopatra retreat into her private chambers, re-emerging only at dusk, with eyes that say she's already read the ending. She still shows up to every council meeting, every festival, but her laughter now has a rusted hinge. Her gown sparkled just a little less. One night, under the painted ceiling of the grand hall, she throws a farewell banquet not labeled as such. Of course, officially, it's a feast of two suns, celebrating a celestial alignment that no one can actually find on the charts. But everyone knows. This is goodbye. Octavian arrives late, draped in ceremonial indigo, the color of decisions. He looks at her across the banquet table. She raises a goblet filled with pomegranate wine and smiles like a woman who has both won and lost everything. There's a performance halfway through the feast dancers, portraying the founding of Neo-Roma in elaborate silk costumes. Octavian claps politely. Cleopatra does not blink. And then, in the final toast, he says something unexpected. He calls her the better builder, says she gave the empire its heart, says that if Rome is to remain eternal, it must remember her eternity, too. Everyone freezes. She raises an eyebrow. The room, for a moment, breathes again. Still, the next morning, his ship is prepared. You walk the harbor with him at dawn. The air smells of salt, farewells, and the faintest trace of perfume from the jasmine bushes by the docks. He says little, just glances at the city, its rising domes, the doves resting on the rooftop shrine to Bastet, and murmurs, she was always better at naming things. He leaves behind a ring, gold, heavy, warm from his hand. She wears it once, then stores it in a hidden compartment behind her throne, next to the original Neo-Roma charter and a half-finished poem. Life in the city goes on, but it's different now. She rules alone, still regal, still sharp but quieter. The festivals continue, but the fireworks are fewer. The council meets, but the laughter fades quicker. You notice she writes more, alone in the late hours, scrolls filling with plans no one sees. And across the sea, Octavian ascends. Rome accepts him like a returned idol, draping him in laurel and ceremony. He speaks of unity, of peace, of past errors and future reforms. But behind his every decree is the ghost of Neo-Roma, and the woman who built it from papyrus, dreams, and marble defiance. Occasionally, they exchange letters. No one reads them, save their most trusted messengers. But one scroll slips out into the wrong hands. It contains only a single line. Did you ever teach the cats Latin? Scholars debate the authenticity, but it feels right. You visit Cleopatra one twilight as she watches the stars appear. She does not cry. She does not rage. She simply watches, as though waiting for a ship that might yet return. You know, she says softly, if I had married Antony, Rome would have just sent a fleet. You smile, because you understand this wasn't about Rome. It was about possibility. About what happens when power and passion stop fighting and start building, even if only for a while. You sit in the dim glow of an oil lamp beside Cleopatra's scribe, an old man with a cough like rust and fingers permanently stained with ink. He's transcribing a new scroll, not for the Senate, not for trade, but for the future. It's a document titled simply, On the Shape of Tomorrow. Cleopatra is planning again. If her days with Octavian were about empire, her days after him are about legacy. And that means infrastructure, education, myth-making. She commissions a series of amphitheaters where science lectures are punctuated by dramatic reenactments last week. An audience sat through a monologue by a talking camel explaining irrigation. Historians still argue whether these camel lectures had any measurable effect on agriculture. She expands the royal archives, personally dictating records of her reign that include fashion notes, favorite wines, and a list of banned Senate nicknames one senator had tried calling her Miss Moonbeam in a scroll. His villa mysteriously filled with frogs the next day. But she's also building a dynasty, not in the traditional sense. Her son, Caesarion, is off studying military strategy and celestial navigation under the alias Marcus Starboy. Her daughters, wise and wild, are already outranking half the court in cleverness and snark. Still, she knows a kingdom built on charisma and eyeliner alone won't last. So she calls for scholars, from India, from Carthage, from Germania. They arrive in boats and caravans, with scrolls and scars and hopeful eyes. She pays them not just in coin, but in land, in titles, in the joy of being taken seriously. No genius should die in obscurity, she says one morning, while arranging lychee on a ceremonial plate shaped like a lion. One of the scholars, an eccentric from Hispania, introduces the concept of non-linear governance, suggesting that cities be ruled like musical compositions. Cleopatra loves it. She adds urban symphony design to the Neo-Roman council agenda. Octavian would have fainted. You watch as the city reshapes itself again. Gardens bloom where there were once barracks. Debate theaters double as food courts. Every citizen is issued a basic toga, a clay water flask, and a voucher for one free philosophy consultation. A child is appointed Minister of Wonder and gets to declare one day a month as mandatory Silly Hat Day. It's absurd. It's sublime. It's Neo-Roma. And yet, you sense a ticking beneath the marble. Because out there, far beyond the seas, Rome is watching, and Rome is nervous. Octavian's policies are firming, his hold tightening. He's returned to tradition, to order, to the idea that an empire needs a single spine. Neo-Roma, to many, is now seen as a glittering detour, a soft distraction. Some say Cleopatra has gone too far. They point to the talking fountains, the edible art exhibit, the time she declared a 2-week public nap schedule based on lunar cycles. Excess, they whisper, eccentricity, empire by daydream. But here's the thing, the people love it. Because for all its strangeness, Neo-Roma works. Roads are clean, courts are fair, citizens are healthier, and there hasn't been a riot since the bread pudding uprising of last year resolved when Cleopatra herself baked 200 loaves in protest. And maybe that's what Rome fears most, that a different way can work. You stroll through the night market, past stalls of glowing scrolls, fermented honey drinks, and a man carving miniature sphinxes that insult you if you squeeze them. Children chase light moths. A choir sings a lullaby in 3 languages. Overhead, stars blink with ancient patience. And yet tomorrow holds weight. Cleopatra receives word from a secret ally, someone in Octavian's inner circle. The Senate is preparing a motion to isolate Neo-Roma, cutting off trade, support, even recognition. They fear you're becoming legend. The scroll reads, and legends are hard to govern. She burns the message without flinching. You ask her that night, what will you do? She thinks for a long time, then smiles, just barely. I will become more legendary. You wake to the sound of drums. Not war drums. Not quite. They're softer, almost ceremonial, echoing through the alleys of Neo-Roma like a heartbeat before a speech. You peer out from a balcony, and there it is a procession. Cleopatra, in full regalia, is being carried through the streets on a litter carved from cedar and gold, flanked by dancers in shimmering teal and saffron. Ahead of her, children scatter petals shaped like papyrus leaves. Behind her, musicians strum lyres, and the city's poet laureate recites a sonnet entirely in feline puns. This is not indulgence. This is a message. The Senate may vote. Rome may bristle. But Neo-Roma Cleopatra thrives. At the forum steps, she speaks. Her voice is not loud, but it pulls every head toward it like gravity. She talks about innovation, about identity, about the idea that an empire can be built on joy as much as law. She declares Neo-Roma a free province of the possible and announces a council of artists to rival the military cabinet. Historians still argue whether the Artists' Council ever wielded real power, but we do know one of their earliest edicts mandated gold leaf borders on all tax forms for dignity. Rome, unsurprisingly, is not immune. Octavian writes a public letter thinly veiled, formally polite, stating that unity must be reaffirmed and that all experiments, however inspiring, must be tempered by discipline. Cleopatra replies with a painting. Yes, a painting. It depicts a Roman eagle politely drinking tea with a Neo-Roman sphinx, while two senators in togas play marbles under the table. It's titled "Maybe Sit Down First" and is sent directly to the Senate gallery. For 3 days, Rome does not respond. You wonder if Octavian laughed. You hope he did. Still, the air grows tense. Ships slow their approach to Neo-Roma's ports. A few envoys cancel visits. The bread imports falter, though no one dares call it a blockade yet. Cleopatra, of course, adapts. She launches Project Wheat Cake, a local farming initiative led by oracles and students. The results are erratic, but edible. One strain of barley glows faintly in the dark, marketed as a novelty. It becomes a cult favorite. There are rumors of a Neo-Roman cheese so potent it's considered diplomatic leverage. The city pivots. Trade routes shift southward. Alliances reroute through Alexandria. And Neo-Roma becomes, if not self-sufficient, then certainly harder to squeeze. You sit in on late-night strategy sessions where Cleopatra toys with maps, strings of colored beads representing political moods, and a game board she calls diplomacy. But with more drama, and through it all, her resolve hardens. She does not write to Octavian again, not even when a small fleet is spotted off the western coast. Not even when a senator's cousin gives a speech in Rome, implying that Neo-Roma is a flame that must cool. You ask her, "Are we preparing for war?" She shakes her head. "We're preparing for remembering, because Cleopatra understands what Rome still doesn't. The real war isn't for land or titles. It's for narrative." So she builds a library bigger than the one in Alexandria, with mirrored halls and scrolls cataloged by mood. Every citizen is invited to contribute one story, fact or fabrication. "We archive not for truth," she says, "but for texture." A mural is unveiled in the central plaza Cleopatra, riding a stylized crocodile into the sky. Scrolls trailing from her hands like comet tails. Some call it blasphemous. Most just call it Tuesday. Even the animals seem in on it. Cats strut with ribbons declaring them Librarian Emeritus. A pelican becomes semi-famous for delivering fan mail between districts. The public baths begin projecting poetry onto steam. Still, you sense something shifting. The joy feels sharper, like laughter just a little too loud. As if Neo-Roma knows that the world is watching and that the story might not end in verse. But for now, Cleopatra reigns, and she will make the most of every syllable. You're sitting in a marble courtyard that smells faintly of cinnamon and old paper, watching a theater troupe rehearse under Cleopatra's watchful gaze. The play is called Octavian's Dilemma and stars a nervous puppet version of the Roman emperor trying to decide between dancing or invading. The chorus wears masks of exaggerated Roman noses. It is ridiculous, and somehow it is also very serious, because satire is Neo-Roma's newest export, and Cleopatra has sanctioned it as official statecraft. Historians still argue whether this constituted a diplomatic offense or just phenomenal PR. The audience laughs. Of course, but the laughter has layers. Beneath the jokes is a sharpness, a challenge. Cleopatra is pushing boundaries not just political, but artistic, cultural, psychological. If we must be watched, she says, let us give them a show they cannot unsee. And oh, how they're watching. Rome sends a cultural envoy, a stiff man in beige robes, who calls everything peripheral. Cleopatra greets him wearing a headpiece shaped like a lyre and offers him a drink called the Basilisk's Lament. He declines. She grins. You follow her that evening to a private garden, where she walks barefoot across moonlit gravel, whispering ideas to the flowers. Neo-Roma must outlast me, she murmurs. Otherwise, it's only a pageant. You nod. Even though she's not really speaking to you, a new phase begins. Less sparkle, more structure. Universities rise on the East Hill, their columns carved with the names of philosophers who never got tenure. Public health centers open, staffed by physicians trained in both medicine and metaphor. One of them diagnoses heartbreak using ancient astronomy. Citizens vote on seasonal colors for street garlands. This spring, saffron and bruised lilac. Cleopatra's time with Octavian taught her many things, chief among them. That legacy is won not by love or war alone, but by administration. So she builds systems, transparent taxation. Each coin accompanied by a haiku about where it's going. Civil courts with optional musical accompaniment. A transport system powered by goats and drama students. She even introduces a citizen pause, a weekly hour of national silence. For rest, reflection, and the occasional synchronized nap. You lie on a rooftop during one such pause. Eyes closed, listening to the city hold its breath. It feels like Neo-Roma is humming. But even the best systems can't block everything. News arrives. A spy ship from Rome, caught just offshore, disguised as a fishing vessel with suspiciously neat netting. Inside scrolls, maps, a bust of Cleopatra with exaggerated eyebrows. The Senate has been debating a motion for sanctions, no official verdict yet. But the vote looms. Cleopatra takes the bust into her personal study. She doesn't destroy it. She sets it on her desk. Then calmly, she sends her reply. A crate of Neo-Roman goods, a velvet robe, a fermented fig wine called Dawn's Mischief, and a letter. Not addressed to Octavian, not to the Senate, just to whoever feels nervous. The letter is short. We are not a threat, unless you insist we must be. In which case, please send better spies. These ones were sunburnt and very rude. You don't know if it's diplomacy or performance art, and maybe that's the point, because Cleopatra has blurred the lines now. Between ruler and muse, between queen and curator, between history and possibility. She doesn't just lead Neo-Roma, she curates it. Every plaza, every proclamation, every market stall that sells scented sand in jars shaped like senators. It all whispers her voice. And then, the eclipse, a real one this time. The sun bows out behind a moon swollen with drama. The city gathers in silence to watch. And Cleopatra, standing in a cloak stitched with stars, simply says, some things you can plan, some things you perform. The eclipse passes, the light returns, and Neo-Roma still stands. But you feel it too now. Something's coming. A reckoning. Maybe. Or just the next act. But for tonight, there is music in the alleys, laughter in the steam, and a queen at the center of it all, holding both absurdity and empire in her painted hands. You're walking through the lower district of Neo-Roma when you see dozens of mosaic tiles being laid along the alley walls. Each tile a portrait of someone ordinary, a baker, a scroll maker, the guy who dances off beat but never misses a night. Above them, a golden inscription. We were here. It's part of Cleopatra's new campaign, the People's Archive. Not just monuments for rulers or martyrs, but for the ones who held the rhythm of daily life. You help a scribe interview a woman who once delivered midnight wine to the queen herself. She tipped in poetry, the woman says, eyes twinkling. It's not just storytelling, it's defense, because the rumors from Rome are growing louder. There's talk of Octavian reconsidering the original marriage deal, that a union once seen as tactical might now be strategically problematic. Some senators whisper that Cleopatra's popularity is outshining Roman dignity, that Neo-Roma is not simply eccentric, it's contagious. And in some ways it is. Other cities begin to copy her model open-air forums with live music, civil festivals judged by audience applause, tax incentives for artists who include jokes in their invoices. Rome responds with pamphlets, grim ones. They depict Cleopatra as a sorceress queen, spinning chaos from a throne of snakes. One claims she's rewritten Roman law using erotic riddles. Another calls Neo-Roma a decadent dream infested with cats. Cleopatra frames them, yes. Frames the pamphlets, puts them in the city's central gallery, invites schoolchildren to annotate them. It's absurd. It's genius. But Octavian's patience thins. He sends a formal envoy, not a spy, not a poet, but a general. His name is Gnaeus Arvidius Pulcher, and he's very tall, very humorless, and very bad at metaphors. You watch him descend the marble steps of the Neo-Roman court, like he's entering enemy territory. Cleopatra, dressed in a robe embroidered with maps of imaginary places, welcomes him with a polite nod and a plate of lemon cakes. They meet for exactly 42 minutes. No one knows what was said, but when Pulcher leaves, he forgets his sandals. Cleopatra has them placed in the city museum under the plaque. The general stepped lightly. A few days later, the Senate passes a resolution Neo-Roma shall be evaluated for structural loyalty. It sounds vague. It sounds like a pretext. The city braces, and Cleopatra pivots again. She launches an initiative called Exit Through the Gift Shop. Part defense, part distraction, part celebration. The central idea, if Neo-Roma must fall, it will do so fabulously. You help hang mirrored curtains across the city gates. The city's tailors design a new fabric that shimmers differently, depending on your mood. A traveling chorus sings operas about hypothetical invasions, and somehow, they make it funny. Every citizen receives a kit, one feathered mask, one scroll of personal memories, and a small token carved from salt. For dissolving, the instructions say, if you forget how bright we were. It sounds like preparation for farewell. It also sounds like defiance. Historians still argue whether Exit Through the Gift Shop was genuine fatalism or an unparalleled form of protest. Some say Cleopatra had lost her grip. Others say she finally perfected her craft. And you see her late at night on the palace roof, gazing toward Rome. She looks tired, but she also looks finished. Not in the sense of ending, but in the sense of complete, like an artist signing the last stroke on a mural nobody asked for, but everyone remembers. You wake to bells, not alarm bells, not mourning. Celebration bells rich, ridiculous peals that echo across Neo-Roma like laughter from a divine throat. It's the day of the mock treaty, Cleopatra's invention. The premise citizens gather in the main plaza to stage a completely fake, over-the-top peace accord between Neo-Roma and whatever enemy exists in our imagination this year. This time, it's the coalition of perpetually serious men. You are now ambassador of the flamboyant alliance. Your sash says so. Cleopatra arrives late, draped in teal and saffron robes stitched with sarcastic aphorisms in 5 languages. On her head, a paper crown that says "Maybe Queen" in sequins. The treaty signing includes interpretive dance, a live goat in diplomatic livery, and a ceremonial disagreement over the flavor of compromise fig versus cinnamon. It's glorious. It's absurd. It's also the last time you see Cleopatra laugh like that, because the next day, Rome sends ships. Not warships, ambassadorial ships, but the kind that carry backup scrolls and legionary advisors just in case diplomacy needs emphasis. The harbor grows tense. Octavian's letter arrives on papyrus so thick, it nearly qualifies as a plank. He does not want war. He wants alignment. Neo-Roma must agree to Roman oversight, cultural revision, and the appointment of a Roman liaison director. Someone to guide Cleopatra's vision into more acceptable lanes. She reads the letter in silence. Then, very softly, she burns it. Rome responds with silence, the kind of silence that arrives just before a thunderclap. Cleopatra summons her council. You're there somehow. You don't know how, but you're seated beside the tax poet and across from the minister of dancing protocols. The queen doesn't shout. She doesn't weep. She simply says, "We are going to throw the biggest funeral for expectations ever seen." Historians still argue whether this was code for retreat or rebellion. What follows is the preparation of the palace. Every room is repainted with scenes from possible futures. Cleopatra leading a lunar colony. Octavian losing at chess to a donkey. A city made entirely of umbrellas. The Great Hall becomes a temporary archive. Every citizen is invited to contribute one memory, one regret, and one recipe. You submit yours anonymously. A memory Cleopatra twirling beneath the eclipse. A regret that you never learned the city's scent by heart. A recipe rosewater fig dumplings served on warmed stones. Meanwhile, Roman diplomats arrive to negotiate. They are bewildered. There are no maps, only riddles, no titles, only costumes. They ask to speak with the queen. She sends them a mirrored scroll with the inscription, "Negotiate with what you see." They hate that. The city braces again, but still, Cleopatra refuses battle. Instead, she opens the archive of might have been. Every citizen walks through it once. It's a cathedral of alternate timelines, paintings of Cleopatra as Roman empress, as philosopher, as ghost. You see one where she and Octavian rule together forever, golden and cold. It doesn't feel real. The real version is messier, warmer, more human. You wander to the rooftop again. Cleopatra is there. She smiles without looking at you. "I wanted a city that couldn't be conquered," she says. "So I built one no one else could understand." You know, heart-aching. "Do you think they'll come, you ask?" She doesn't answer. Instead, she hands you a tiny sealed scroll. "Open it only if you forget what we were," she says. Then she walks inside. And the wind tastes like endings. You're brushing imaginary sand from your sleeves when you realize you've somehow drifted into a Theban dressing room. No, really. This is not your average throne room or war chamber or slightly crumbling Roman bathhouse. This is a high-gloss, high-drama, high-ankle sandal runway for what Cleopatra's new empire has branded without a shred of modesty as Imperial Aesthetics Week. And you? You're now a reluctant backstage observer, trying not to trip over an overstarched hem or get poked in the eye by a golden ibis headpiece. Cleopatra, true to form, is orchestrating the entire thing from a chaise longue piled in cheetah print silks, flanked by servants holding polished bronze mirrors, and what appears to be a 6-foot staff, topped with an ankh made of rubies and mild menace. Across the room, a Roman stylist in a saffron toga is frantically pinning a draped linen tunic that appears to defy gravity and historical accuracy. It's supposed to say, "I conquered Gaul, but make it chic," he hisses, sweat beading at his temples. Nearby, an Egyptian seamstress calmly threads golden beads into a papyrus-inspired cloak with the serenity of someone who's been through 17 emperors and knows none of this will matter by harvest season. Yes, fashion has changed, or more precisely, mutated. Roman austerity has been absorbed, glamorized, and repackaged into something that would make Cato the Elder combust in his sandal straps. Thanks to Cleopatra's influence, there are now emerald eyeliner kits sold in Pompeii markets, lotus embroidered cloaks being worn unironically in the Forum, and, most alarmingly, a surge in men requesting tunics inspired by Osiris. But sexy. Historians still argue whether this cultural blend marks a true eastward shift in imperial identity or just an overly ambitious PR campaign. But there's no denying the empire looks different. In Thebes, the streets have become a parade of textiles. Indigo-dyed shawls from Nubia, feathered capes from Crete, an extremely nervous patrician debuting a leather harness inspired by Horus for ceremonial use only. He clarifies, blushing into his fig wine. Street vendors sell linen sandals adorned with lapis lazuli charms, and artisans are engraving Cleopatra's eyeliner style into silver medallions like it's the crest of a noble house. Even Octavian, sorry. Augustus now has gotten into the spirit, reluctantly. He's recently commissioned a series of robes with subtle crocodile embroidery at the hem, and though he claims it's for diplomatic purposes, you catch him smiling at his reflection a little too long. He insists the purple dye is for visibility, but Cleopatra knows it's because he likes how it makes his eyes pop. The imperial court, of course, has leaned fully in. Cleopatra's children parade around in jewel-toned outfits styled like miniature pharaohs and young senators. At formal dinners, guests are seated not just by status, but by how well their ensemble matches the host's theme. Tonight's theme, Conquest Casual. The appetizers arrive on alabaster trays shaped like pyramids, and a waiter explains the pomegranate sauce with the solemnity of a priest. You're not even surprised anymore. Somewhere across the hall, a man in a linen vest and gold lame skirt is trying to explain to his date that his outfit is technically authentic to Ptolemaic tribute rituals. In a quiet corner, you overhear two scribes complaining about their new uniforms. I used to wear charcoal wool and anonymity. One mutters, adjusting his gold-trimmed sleeve. Now I look like a tax collector in a children's play. The other scribe nods sympathetically. At least yours doesn't have sequined falcon wings, he whispers, gesturing toward a glittering backplate that catches the torchlight like a disco ball from Memphis. But here's the thing, it works. The fashion isn't just flair, it's empire building. Its identity is soft power. Cleopatra has turned self-presentation into statecraft. Her empire is no longer just land, it's a lifestyle. You don't just live under her rule. You're encouraged to look like you do. Even the statues have been updated. Gone are the marble monochromes. Now, temples feature full-color friezes with Cleopatra depicted in alternating styles. Greek goddess on Mondays, Roman general on Wednesdays, Egyptian deity every full moon. Tourists, yes, even in antiquity flock to see them. There's talk of a traveling wax figure exhibit. Cleopatra. Through the dynasties. Someone murmurs behind a curtain. You pass a scroll vendor hawking the official Cleopatra lookbook, featuring sketches of royal garments annotated in Latin, Greek, and something that suspiciously looks like modern-day sarcasm. Page 12. The eye-kissed and Alexandrian. Nobleman robe, now in olive. Page 37. General's tunic with built-in pep talk, outside the palace. Vendors shout over bolts of crimson silk. Street musicians drum in sync with models' footsteps. Somewhere, a child is selling miniature wigs for cats, and business is booming. The cats are not thrilled, but the market is relentless. You pause beneath a banner painted with Cleopatra's profile, cheekbones like marble, coal like armor. The inscription reads, Vestis potentia est. Clothing is power. And you think this is what rule looks like in 21 BCE. It glitters. It flows. It leaves gold dust in its wake. So as you back away from the catwalks of Thebes, maybe still blinking glitter from your eyelashes, you begin to understand Cleopatra isn't just conquering Rome. She's rebranding it. And everyone's buying in. You smell the chaos before you hear it. Smoke, not fire. But the heavy scent of baking gone wrong, of crusts burned, and tempers rising drifts across the Forum of Alexandria, like an omen wrapped in yeast. Somewhere, someone is screaming about barley quotas. Elsewhere, a goat in a floral collar is refusing to be moved. The grain war of 21 BCE has officially begun. It's not really a war, of course not in the marching army sense. But tell that to the woman hurling loaves like discus at a Roman tax officer's retreating back. The crowd roars as one hits its mark, with a soft thud of carbohydrate rebellion. Here's what happened. The Nile flooded gloriously, abundantly. Egypt's granaries swelled. Grain prices dropped. In Egypt, but not in Rome. Why? Because Cleopatra, ever the strategic empress, had declared a temporary export restriction to stabilize domestic markets and, not coincidentally, remind Rome who now controlled the empire's stomach. Historians still argue whether this was economic brilliance or passive-aggressive sabotage. Octavian, now very much Augustus. In name and growing middle management energy was not amused. He'd promised the Roman people stability. And nothing ruins that faster than a bread shortage and an angry toga-wearing crowd chanting, "Give us grain or give us gruel." The Senate lost it. Panic hit like spoiled garum. Senators threw emergency banquets to distract the public. One even tried handing out bread-inspired poetry pamphlets. Another, less literarily inclined, offered a discount on municipal baths. But Cleopatra didn't flinch. She knew her leverage. Egypt wasn't just a jewel. It was the empire's pantry. She held the breadbasket and the menu. In Alexandria, life continued, but with an extra edge of smugness. Bakers named their most popular loaf Roman regret. Street performers reenacted Octavian's latest Senate tantrum with baguette puppets. At one point, an entire comedy chorus performed in oversized wheat costumes, singing, "O Grains of Wrath." Meanwhile, on the imperial barge turned floating office, Cleopatra drafted diplomatic responses with the flair of a seasoned CEO and the vocabulary of a particularly cheeky playwright. One scroll began. "To my dearly distressed colleagues in Rome, please chew slowly and read to the end." Octavian, trying to maintain unity, requested a formal grain summit. Cleopatra agreed. It took place in Memphis. Not that Memphis. This. Memphis, Egypt's old capital, repurposed now as a resort city for statecraft and leisure retreats. Think marble-columned negotiation rooms with decorative lotus fountains and a surprisingly aggressive dessert buffet. The summit began civilly. By hour 3, someone threw a pomegranate. "You cannot ration glory," Octavian snapped at one point. Pounding the table, "You can, when it rises at harvest and spoils by shipment." Cleopatra purred, sipping honey wine from a cup shaped like a falcon. Eventually, a compromise was reached. Limited exports would resume, but only to Roman provinces that agreed to host Cleopatra's cultural exchange festivals. These were part trade fair, part fashion show, and part soft power campaign featuring flaming cheese platters and readings from Cleopatra's Guide to Empire Chic Living. You might think the Romans would hate this, and they did, until they didn't, because the bread came back. And it was good. And the festivals, well, once you've tasted Alexandria's cinnamon honey buns while watching a reenactment of Caesar's landing choreographed to harp music, it's hard to stay mad. Back in Alexandria, Cleopatra's approval rating soared. Breadline graffiti featured her profile captioned, "The Wheat Whisperer." Children played Cleopatra Says in alleyways. Priests thanked the gods for gluten. But beneath the joy, tensions baked quietly. Rome still grumbled. The grain war had revealed a truth no amount of fig wine could hide. The empire's balance had shifted east. Cleopatra now fed it, literally. And once you feed something, you own part of it. You pass a mural on your way out of the city, a towering image of Cleopatra handing a loaf to a Roman senator. Her eyes calm, his panicked, his toga slightly askew. Below, a caption in hieroglyphs and Latin reads, "Panem et potentia." Bread and power. The people still dance. The ovens still glow. But the air hums now with more than flour and fire. It hums with empire. The scroll arrives at dawn, tied with a ribbon, the exact shade of a bruised plum, and scented with something that smells suspiciously like intrigue. You're not supposed to read it. Of course, it's addressed to the ambassador from Parthia, sealed with Cleopatra's signet, and carried by a bird that is probably not magical, but it feels magical. Everything Cleopatra does these days feels like that. Like watching a magician who also invented the trick and negotiated the ticket sales. You crack the seal, slowly, respectfully, hypothetically, inside diplomacy dressed as seduction, or maybe seduction dressed as foreign policy. Hard to say. The handwriting is elegant, the ink flecked with gold. The scroll begins, "Dearest flame of the eastern desert, I trust this finds you reclining amid luxury, sipping dates and plotting politely. I write not as queen, nor as wife, but as a woman who has known fire and dares now to spark." Oh boy, by paragraph 4, the grain tariffs are referenced. By paragraph 6, there's a poetic aside about Roman shipping delays. By paragraph 8, Cleopatra casually mentions the marriage customs of desert kings and suggests a joint naval pageant as gesture of mutual admiration and cannon display. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra's letters were sincere diplomatic overtures or high-concept performance art. But what everyone agrees on is this: worked. Cleopatra's correspondences became legendary. Silk scrolls inked with charm, veiled threats, philosophical musings, and the occasional recipe. Emissaries lined up just for the chance to receive one. One king even framed his and hung it in the throne room. Another tried to marry the messenger, and back in Alexandria, the empress refined the craft daily. She had a team now. Scribes, poets, spies working in a gilded chamber filled with cushions and scroll racks. They called it the Velvet Office. You'd call it the Empire's rumor engine, with every scroll. Cleopatra wove networks, flirted across borders, cultivated fear and fascination like one water's orchids. Octavian, initially bemused, now began to worry. His dispatches, though competent, read like tax instructions beside hers. One senator was overheard saying, "Augustus is writing treaties. Cleopatra is writing novels." The power imbalance wasn't just military anymore. It was narrative, and narratives. Dear listener, win wars before they begin. You stroll past the Library of Alexandria one humid afternoon and spot a group of students reading excerpts aloud. It's a Cleopatra scroll, allegedly addressed to a Gallic chieftain. They're swooning, debating metaphors. One has a tattoo of her signature, yes, Already, even the Senate starts quoting her. At a banquet, a Roman general raises his glass and toasts to Cleopatra, the only person alive who can declare war with eyeliner. Laughter follows. Nervous laughter. But laughter. Meanwhile, Cleopatra isn't just writing. She's reading everything. She's requested scrolls on Parthian customs, Scythian battle formations, Germanic dialects, and even Etruscan ghost stories, don't ask. Her knowledge isn't random. It's surgical. Every future threat is studied, every potential ally mapped, every enemy profiled like a character in a very long, very slow-burning epic where she intends to write the last line. You catch her one night, barefoot on the palace balcony, dictating a reply by moonlight. Tell the ambassador that I find his offer charming, his tribute excessive, and his knowledge of naval logistics alarming. But I will forgive the insult if he sends more dates, and perhaps a map of the Caspian, annotated. You swear she winks. These are not love letters. These are power moves, disguised as perfume samples, and the empire listens. Rome, now thoroughly confused, tries to respond in kind. They hire poets. They send gifts. One senator sends an awkward statue of Mars making finger guns. Cleopatra responds with a one-word scroll. No. Her words, more than any army. Redraw the map, because while Octavian builds roads and taxes, Cleopatra builds feelings. And feelings, they linger longer than monuments, especially when they smell like plum ink and diplomacy. You're sipping date wine at a modest symposium, tucked behind the Alexandrian market district, a cozy affair. Mostly philosophers, a few poets, one guy in a cloak who keeps pretending not to be taking notes. The evening starts quietly, incense smoke curling in lazy tendrils. A fig platter passed around like communion for the vaguely curious. Then someone mentions Cleopatra's divinity, and suddenly it's a cage match in togas. On one side, the Stoics, stern, austere, sandal-clad pessimists who believe virtue is found in suffering, and that Cleopatra is, at best, a highly efficient mortal. They quote Seneca, who hasn't been born yet, but that doesn't stop them. They argue that no true philosopher queen would wear that much kohl eyeliner or bedazzle her sandals. On the other, the Neoplatonists, wild-eyed mystics with pocket scrolls and crystal amulets. They believe Cleopatra is a living embodiment of divine wisdom, the Logos in eyeliner. One of them compares her to Isis, Aphrodite, and a sunrise after heartbreak, all in the same breath. You try to sneak more wine. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra actually encouraged this divine rebranding, or if the cult of personality simply bloomed around her like a particularly theatrical fungus. She never explicitly claimed godhood, but she didn't shut it down either. And her wardrobe wasn't exactly helping. Take, for example, her goddess of diplomacy looked gilded serpents on her shoulders, a silk robe embroidered with constellations, and a diadem so heavy she had to rest it on a small, jewel-crusted pillow when seated. Subtle. She was not. But power in Cleopatra's world is never subtle, and Alexandria, already prone to mythologizing everything from cats to librarians, eats it up within months. Vendors are selling votive candles shaped like Cleopatra's nose. Street preachers deliver sermons on her sacred 6 virtues: beauty, balance, strategy, wit, glamour, and possibly immortality. One baker creates a honey pastry in her honor and calls it Queen of Sighs. It's flaky, dramatic, and sells out daily. Octavian, meanwhile, tries to pivot. He releases a new set of imperial coinage, featuring both their profiles, his stern and laureled, hers soft and radiant. The public reaction is lopsided. Cleopatra becomes an icon, Octavian becomes the guy who happens to stand next to her. Even children start reenacting her speeches during pretend trials. One 6-year-old loudly condemns a stuffed animal for insufficient vibes. Parents are torn between pride and confusion. You're invited to a university debate more formal than the tavern symposium, but no less theatrical. The topic was Cleopatra divinely ordained or just exceptionally on brand. The Stoics quote virtue ethics. The Neoplatonists quote cosmic harmony. A third group, the Ironists, eat grapes and shrug. In the back, a bust of Cleopatra watches, slightly smirking. But what's fascinating isn't just the argument. It's how she's reshaped the terms of leadership. In a world where rulers typically claim divine favor, Cleopatra flirts with divine presence. She doesn't say the gods chose me. She implies I am the gods' choosing. And people believe her, partly because she walks like she invented time, partly because, well, no one else is making diplomacy this entertaining. At an elite temple banquet, she gives a toast half sermon, half roast. If the gods did not intend for mortals to lead, then they should not have granted us mirrors, scrolls, or dreams. I, for one, intend to use all three. The room applauds. One priest faints. The next morning, there's a new minor cult in the city dedicated to divine wit. Their sacred relic is allegedly a goblet she left behind, still stained with pomegranate wine. And yet there's nuance. Cleopatra doesn't demand worship. She demands attention. The godliness isn't about kneeling. It's about orbiting, which is why, even as Rome rolls its eyes and grumbles about moral decay, it can't look away. Senators privately commission portraits of her. Philosophers include her in dialogues as she who navigates the unnavigable. One gladiator legally changes his name to Cleoptavius. You pass a wall scroll downtown. It reads, "If she is mortal, let her speak like one. If she is divine, let her stay queen." Anonymous, but obviously a fan. By the end of the year, Cleopatra has not only survived the ideological warfare, she's reframed it. The question is no longer, is she divine? But what kind of divinity is she? A goddess of reason, of rebellion, of glamorized competence. You lean back, full of wine and honey pastries, and realize something humbling. You may never know, but you'll remember the glow. You find yourself edging toward the eastern stables at dawn, under a lavender sky that smells faintly of sand and smoke, where Octavian is pacing beside his retinue and a dozen mounted Parthian scouts. The air is tense and dusty, the promise of another campaign shimmering over the horizon like a mirage. Cleopatra strides ahead of them, a satchel slung across her shoulder, eyes locked on the maps laid out on a wooden table propped against a wagon. Her teal cloak brushes banana boxes and cracked pottery, her saffron sash standing out against the faded canvas. She's talking strategy logistics, supply lines, river crossings, with the precision of someone who's organized royal pageants stronger than a century-old aqueduct. You sense the moment this is her plan, while Octavian hesitates, glancing between her and his Parthian counterparts. Cleopatra issues a command to send wagons of water miles in advance, to recruit Nubian archers for guard duty, and to build temporary river bridges. Her gaze never wanders. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra was truly a military mind, or just a theatrical stage manager who loved to wear uniforms. But here it feels very real. Maybe it's the way she traces the Nile's changing course with a stick, or the way she orders 3 types of barley rations for cavalry and infantry. Something in her tone carries authority. You believe her. Fringe rumor claims that the Parthian scouts once abandoned their post because she spoke them into drinking rose honey wine and forgetting they were even enemies. Other accounts say those traders who traveled the silk routes claimed she personally inspected camel packs for contraband spices and whispered poetic curses at smugglers when she wasn't reading Pindar. It sounds wild, but here, watching her negotiate with local chieftains in broken Greek, you start to doubt what's impossible. Octavian, arms crossed in his indigo legionnaire's tunic, is watching her equal parts concerned, impressed, and slightly resentful. He clears his throat when she assigns roles to Roman centurions. You see the flicker of something like pride, but you also know the political stakes. If this eastern push fails, and Parthia isn't exactly friendly with empty promises, Rome will claim her triumph as theirs and her losses as hers. You step away as the march begins. Wagons clatter, camels yawn, and Cleopatra mounts her horse, brushing a braid of hair from her forehead. You wonder what happens if she wins. Does she ride back triumphant? Does Rome bow? Historians still argue whether her influence on Eastern policy was stabilizing or ultimately overreaching, and 10,000 grains of sand probably couldn't settle the debate. But at this moment, under that pink dawn, you feel her empire coming alive in the dust. You're perched on a stone bench shaped like a stylized lotus, half hidden beneath an olive tree in the palace courtyard, and across the sunlit terrace, the royal family is mid-chaos. Not chaos like war or famine. No. Something much worse. Succession planning. Cleopatra's children, like glittering question marks, trail behind her in an array of silk and ambition. There's Caesarion, her firstborn, with Julius Caesar still brooding in indigo robes, with a stylized hawk embroidered on the hem. Eyes darting toward every conversation like he's trying to win them all. Then there's Alexios, the younger son with Octavian, with a penchant for quoting Cicero and adjusting his hair in bronze mirrors. And Selene, proud, brilliant, already fluent in 4 languages, and somehow convinced she's the logical heir because, as she once reportedly told a foreign ambassador, boys are deeply unreliable. The problem isn't just about bloodlines. It's geography, politics, and egos. You've got Roman senators still refusing to acknowledge Cleopatra as anything more than a charming regional partner, and Egyptian priests grumbling that Octavian's presence disrupts the sacred balance. Throw in a few cousins with vague royal claims, and a scheming vizier named Ptolemaeus, who insists Cleopatra once promised him a satrapy during a very drunken dinner. And here's the twist: all of them might be right. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra had an official plan at all, or if she preferred the dynasty to remain fluid, mythic, and just confusing enough to make any would-be usurper pause out of pure anxiety. You watch her now as she calmly listens to Caesarion present his case for controlling Alexandria, while Alexios and Selene bicker in the background over who should govern Judea. Octavian sips date wine from a goblet the size of a small amphora and says nothing. Classic. Rumors swirl that Cleopatra once drafted 5 separate succession documents, each naming a different heir, each stored in a different city. One supposedly ended up in Carthage, another eaten by sacred ibises. Fringe theories even suggest she intended her children to co-rule as a triumvirate, each balancing the others out. One for Rome, one for Egypt, one for the weird bits in between, but no one can agree. The philosophers argue in shaded cloisters, the scribes sharpen their reed pens in anticipation, and the people, they mostly just want someone who won't raise the wine tax. Meanwhile, you stroll through a corridor where portraits line the walls past rulers, imagined futures, and for a moment you see 3 thrones carved from sycamore wood, side by side, No name plaques, no favorites, just waiting. The vision vanishes in the sunlight, but the tension lingers. Because empires fall, often from within, and nothing guarantees collapse like a family meeting with snacks and unresolved childhood trauma. Twilight sinks into Alexandria like a silk veil dipped in plum ink. The horizon is quiet now. No galleys returning from war. No horns heralding decrees, just the rustle of papyrus and the salt tang of the sea. You sit under an awning of creeping jasmine, and across the courtyard, the palace doors creak open. 2 robed priests step aside, and Cleopatra, Queen of Kings, emerges for the last time. She wears lavender, the color of dusk, of endings, of royalty just beginning to fade. Her arms are bare, bangled with serpent-shaped gold. Her expression, serene, maybe tired, definitely theatrical. Cleopatra always knew how to stage a farewell. Historians still argue whether she died by snakebite, poison-laced hairpin, or a performance so convincing it made death itself applaud. But in this world, your dream world, her end is neither sudden nor solitary. Instead, it is orchestrated like a festival with grief in formal wear. The people line the streets in hushed reverence. Octavian, older now, stands beside her with one hand clutching a scroll and the other on his chest. No speeches, no declarations, just a nod. And then she vanishes into the hall of eternity, a chamber carved from marble and moonlight. Inside are relics from her reign, papyrus scrolls, star charts, letters from philosophers, and one very charred fondue fork from that incident during the Festival of Unified Taxation. The guards bow. The curtains fall. It's said that Octavian didn't cry. Not then. But after the rites, he commissioned 12 statues of her, each in a different pose, ruling, reading, laughing, dancing, holding their son. None showed her dying. One fringe theory claims he had her likeness etched onto one of the obelisks in Rome's Forum, but disguised as the goddess Fortuna, so no senator would dare protest. Another suggests he built a quiet mausoleum in his countryside estate, where lilies bloom every spring and never ask who they're for, but the grief catches up with him. Not all at once, over years, in paintings, in music, in the way he avoids lavender fabric and once banned the use of coal in public ceremonies. Cleopatra's death didn't break the empire, but it did unstring something delicate inside it. Octavian rules on, but without the sparkle, the danger, the exquisite unpredictability. He orders marble fountains, builds libraries, names a theater after her cat, but the fire dims, and in dreams. In secret dreams, he still sees her at court, still hears her laugh echo off sandstone, still wonders if this empire is too quiet now, too stable, too... Roman. You stand now in the shadow of what was once Rome, but it doesn't feel like the city you remember. The marble is warmer here, veined with desert hues. Obelisks rise where columns used to. Fountains gurgle in the shapes of lotus blossoms, and the air carries the scent of saffron and sandalwood. Welcome to Rome, reimagined, not conquered, not annexed, but remodeled by memory and love and the long aftertaste of Cleopatra. Octavian, or Augustus, as he's officially known now, has transformed the city. But instead of rebuilding in his own stern image, he folds it into hers. Egyptian motifs curl around triumphal arches. The Senate Hall features a mural of the Nile. Temples once dedicated solely to Jupiter now share altar space with Isis and Bastet. Their statues standing shoulder to shoulder with Roman gods like awkward cousins at a family reunion. The people adapt, as people always do, Roman children play games pretending to be Cleopatra's cats. Bakers sell anise-scented bread shaped like pyramids. Nobles name their daughters Arsinoe and their summer villas Casa Cleopatra. At one point, an aspiring poet tries to write the Aeneid entirely in hieroglyphs. It is not successful, but you have to admire the effort. Historians still debate whether this cultural fusion strengthened the empire or diluted it. Was Cleopatra's influence a breath of life, or the start of the empire's Baroque unraveling? One camp insists that Roman virtue was lost beneath too much gold paint and too many festival days. Another argues that Cleopatra saved the Roman soul from its own boring self-seriousness. What you do know is that archaeologists from the future, those with sensible hats and dust brushes, will be baffled. They'll unearth statues of emperors dressed in linen robes, holding cornucopias shaped like scarabs. They'll find mosaics of Egyptian lotus blossoms flanked by Latin inscriptions. And somewhere beneath the rubble of a reimagined Colosseum, they'll uncover a theater script titled Octavian in Thebes, complete with musical cues, the great Roman roads, now flanked by incense vendors and lined with date palms. The aqueducts, still functional now, painted in pastel blues and adorned with cat faces. Even the coinage has changed. Cleopatra's profile still appears beside Octavian's, but now she's smiling slyly, wearing the crown of both the sun and moon. The city's soundtrack has changed too. Harps and flutes weave through street markets. Dancers in diaphanous tunics swirl in the squares. One newly fashionable senator claims that the only proper way to debate legislation is after a full-body jasmine oil massage and a duet with a temple singer. You're not sure what Rome is anymore, but you know it's still alive. And in its strange, hybrid heartbeat half-scroll, half-sword, you hear Cleopatra's rhythm. Still beating, still sovereign. The statues remain, of course. They always do. Marble endures better than memory. But you, walking through this city re-scripted by love and legend, can't help but notice something's shifted. The plaques under Cleopatra's likeness no longer call her a temptress, a foreign queen, a political anomaly. They call her Regina Aeternum, eternal queen, co-ruler, philosopher empress, architect of the Great Compromise. You step into a quiet colonnade where the breeze carries the murmur of students reciting their lessons. History classes here don't start with Romulus and Remus anymore. They start with Alexandria, with the day Rome didn't win a war, but found a partner. Inside the House of Archives, formerly the Temple of Apollo, young scholars gather around scrolls, busts, and holographic reenactments, okay? Maybe that's from a dream version. They argue in hushed Latin about Cleopatra's policies, her economic reforms, her use of theater as propaganda. One student insists she introduced the first meaningful maternity leave policy. Another swears she invented decorative eyeliner purely to distract senators during tax negotiations. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra was Rome's savior or its slow undoing. Some paint her as a cunning manipulator who seduced the empire off course. Others see her as a radical reformer whose vision redefined what empire could mean, not just conquest, but collaboration. But everyone agrees she changed everything, and she looked great doing it. Her image is everywhere now, not just in coins and murals, but in fashion. The Cleopatra collar is a staple among high-born Roman ladies. The Memphian sandal is all the rage. Even gladiators have taken to wearing eyeliner before combat, half intimidation, half tribute. Octavian's own legacy is tangled up in hers. You can't mention him without conjuring the scent of her perfume, the flash of her smile, the soft sound of silk in the halls of power. His triumphs feel less sharp now, tempered by the knowledge that he once bowed his head in her temple, not in worship, but in partnership. Even poets have stopped idealizing Aeneas and started writing tragic comic operas about Mark Antony, who now exists mostly as a cautionary punchline. Don't drink the Nile wine, or you'll end up like Antony. Your favorite monument, though, is simple. A small marble bust of Cleopatra, placed in a shaded courtyard in the Forum. No plaque, no inscription, just a single painted eye with a perfect flick of coal, staring outward, eternally amused. The pigeons perch respectfully around her, as if even they understand not to mess with the queen of sass and strategy. She's not just remembered, she's alive in myth, in murals, in metaphors, in the tiny cosmetic jars sold in street stalls, labeled Cleopatra's secret definitely not snake venom. And as you lean back, letting the sun warm your face and the whispers of her legacy wind around you like silk, you understand the strange alchemy of history, that even in an empire reshaped by love and compromise, truth and storytelling are always doing a slow, messy waltz. Time drifts like incense smoke through an open colonnade, curling around statues, banisters, and memory itself. You wander through the final chapter not in a hurry, but with a reverent hush, as if history might wake if your sandals scrape too loudly on the tiled floor. And maybe it would, because some stories are so alive, they flinch in their sleep. It's been decades since Cleopatra and Octavian stood beneath the honey-lit sky of Alexandria, declaring an empire not of conquest, but of co-rule. Since then, scrolls have faded, opinions have calcified, and yet her name still carries heat. You pass a group of children playing at Empire, one wearing a crooked gold circlet, another shouting, "I'm the Duchess of Ptolemaic Logistics." You can't help but grin, because even here, where time has marched on and graffiti in the alley behind the Senate reads Snake Queen forever, Cleopatra remains a presence more persistent than marble. The truth myths are the most resilient form of memory. Cleopatra isn't just remembered, she's repurposed, revered, parodied, immortalized in mosaic murals above bakeries that sell royal honey cakes in her honor. A line of perfumes named the Misty Cleopatra claims to evoke her sandalwood and jasmine aura. Historians doubt the authenticity, but buy it anyway. You sit one final time at the city's edge, where desert gives way to garden, and think about how all of this might have gone differently if Octavian had arrived not with chains, but with a ring. And he did. It was improbable. It was politically reckless. It was whispered about for decades as a romantic stunt and a strategic masterstroke in equal measure. But above all, it changed the story. Historians still argue whether the Cleopatra-Octavian alliance postponed the fall of Rome, hastened its evolution, or merely exchanged one flavor of tyranny for another. But they agree on this. It made Rome feel different, more silk than steel, more coal than cruelty. An empire where empresses weren't tragic footnotes, but authors of entire volumes. And even now, generations later, the people remember. They raise their goblets to her legacy. They read bedtime stories about her cleverness. And sometimes, just before drifting off, they dream of marble halls filled with laughter, strategy, and the scent of cinnamon oil. So you breathe softly. Let the memory of an empire built on audacity and eyeliner tuck itself beneath your ribs. Let the velvet curtains of sleep descend gently across your mind, slow and heavy as the dusk over Alexandria. The stars blink into being above the dome of the old observatory, once Cleopatra's private sky garden. Below, someone plays a lyre tune she might have liked. Somewhere, a street performer dressed as Mark Antony drops his prop sword and mutters, "Why do I always die in Act 3?" And somewhere even quieter than that, the desert listens, Because Cleopatra's revolution isn't buried. It's retold, over fires, in books, in eyeliner ads, in whispered lullabies that end, not with good night, but with long may she reign. And now, as your breathing slows and the thoughts settle like grains of silt in the Nile's hush, let yourself drift from the marble galleries of imagined memory. Let Cleopatra step lightly back into the shadows of time, her smile still curled in victory, or at least mischief. Let the flicker of candlelight on frescoed walls fade into the soft glow behind your eyelids. You are not in Alexandria anymore, not in Rome, not in the middle of a smoky feast, nor a toga-sashed debate about whether eyeliner can be a tool of statecraft. You're simply here, present, resting, floating downstream on the warm current of a history softened by what-ifs and lullabies. Feel the last rustle of linen, the faint echo of sandals over tiled halls, the dying shimmer of a mosaic ceiling lit by moonlight. You've done enough tonight. Enough wandering, enough remembering, enough marveling at what could have been. The story lingers like all the best ones do, not in the loud, crashing chapters of war and fire, but in the quiet aftermath of choices made in the dark, between two rulers who could have destroyed each other, but didn't. So allow yourself now to sleep, knowing that not all empires fall. Some simply evolve into dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.